6 nannies, 4 months, one billionaire who could buy anything in this world, except the one thing his daughter needed most. Damien Ashcroft had built an empire from nothing, turned concrete and steel into a fortune that made headlines on 3 continents. But tonight, sitting across from his 6-year-old daughter in a roadside diner somewhere off the highway, watching her stare at her untouched food without making a single sound, he felt like the poorest man alive. He didn't know it yet, but the woman who was about to change everything was already walking toward their table, carrying a coffee pot and wearing worn-out shoes. If this story moves you, drop a like and leave a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now stay with me, because this is only the beginning. The rain had started somewhere around exit 47, the kind of slow, gray drizzle that didn't dramatic enough to be interesting but relentless enough to ruin everything. Damien Ashcroft had been driving for 2 hours without a destination, which was unusual for a man who scheduled his mornings in 15-minute blocks and hadn't taken an unplanned turn since 2019. But Lily hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. That was the thing no one on his staff could seem to understand. It wasn't about behavior. It wasn't about discipline. It wasn't about whatever psychological framework the latest nanny had quoted from whatever book she'd read on the plane ride to his Connecticut estate. His daughter was 6 years old, and she had simply stopped wanting things. Food, conversation, the stuffed rabbit she used to drag everywhere. She'd set it on the windowsill 3 months ago and hadn't touched it since. The last nanny, Margaret, 54, 20 years of experience, glowing references from 2 European families, had quit on a Tuesday. She'd left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter that said, "I'm so sorry. I don't know how to reach her." And underneath that, in smaller letters, as though she'd almost not written it, "Neither does he." Damien had read it standing in his kitchen in a suit he hadn't changed out of since the day before, and he hadn't said a word. He'd folded the note in half and put it in the pocket of his jacket next to his phone, and he'd worn it there like a stone for 3 days before his assistant had finally sent the jacket to the dry cleaners. He noticed the diner from the highway, a low building with a yellow sign, the kind of place where the booths had probably been the same color since 1987, and the pie was either the best thing you'd ever eaten or quietly terrible. He pulled off without thinking about it. Lily was in the back seat, buckled in, staring out the window at the rain without any particular expression. "Hey," he said, putting the car in park. "You want to go inside?" She didn't answer. She hadn't answered a direct question in 11 days. He'd been counting. He got out, opened her door, unbuckled her himself. She didn't resist. She took his hand when he offered it, which he'd learned to treat as a victory, small as it was. Her fingers were cold. He should have brought a jacket for her. The temperature had dropped, and he hadn't thought about it. And now here he was, a man with 4 properties and a private car service, forgetting his kid needed a jacket. The bell above the diner door made a small sound when they walked in. The place smelled like coffee and something fried, and it was mostly empty. A couple at a corner booth, an older man on a stool at the counter reading a folded newspaper. A television mounted near the ceiling was showing a weather broadcast with the sound off. The hostess, a teenager with a ponytail and a phone in her apron pocket, pointed them toward a booth near the window. Damien took the seat across from Lily and picked up the laminated menu without reading it. He watched his daughter instead. She was looking at the little containers of sugar packets in the middle of the table, the kind that come in white and pink and yellow. And she reached out and touched one with one finger, just barely, like she was checking if it was real. It was the most interested she'd looked in anything in weeks. The waitress appeared at the edge of his peripheral vision, and he glanced up expecting the usual, tired, polite, efficient. Someone who'd take the order and disappear. Instead, the woman who stopped at their table looked directly at Lily first, not at him, at Lily. "Hey there," she said. Her voice was easy, not the kind of bright and fake that adults use with kids when they're performing warmth rather than feeling it. "Those are my favorite part of the job, honestly, the sugar packets. You can build a lot of things with those." Lily looked at her, didn't look away. Damien watched this happen and didn't move. The woman, her name tag said Hannah, written in blue ink below the diner's logo, set her notepad down on the edge of the table without being asked to, and she slid into the booth, not across from Lily, next to her, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she'd done it 100 times, like she hadn't just sat down uninvited at the table of a customer she'd never met. "Okay, watch," Hannah said. She pulled out 2 pink packets and a white one, and she stood them upright, leaning them against each other. A little triangle. Then she added another. "You can make a whole house if you're careful enough. The trick is the corners." Lily stared at the structure. Then very slowly, she reached out and added a yellow packet to the side. Hannah looked at it seriously, the way you'd look at an architectural decision. "That's actually better," she said. "Yellow on the outside. Good instinct." Damien realized he had stopped breathing. He'd taken his daughter to 3 child psychologists in 4 months. He'd bought her new toys, new books, a puppy that she'd petted twice and then ignored. He'd arranged a play date with the daughter of a colleague, which had ended in 40 minutes when Lily simply got up from the playroom floor and walked to the front door and stood there until someone took her home. He had spent more money trying to solve this problem than most people earned in a decade, and none of it, had produced what he was watching right now, which was his daughter making a small sound that was almost a laugh. "What do you want to eat?" Hannah asked her, not looking at the menu, keeping her eyes on Lily's face. "And you can tell me if you don't know yet. That's fine too. I can come back?" Lily was quiet for a moment. Damien's chest tightened. Then Lily said, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, but was absolutely her voice, "Pancakes." It was the first word she'd said to anyone outside their house in 19 days. Hannah nodded like it was completely normal, like small girls said words to her every day without it being a miracle. "Blueberry or plain?" A pause. "Blueberry." "Good choice." Hannah stood up, picked up her notepad. She glanced at Damien for the first time, and her expression was just normal, professional. A little tired around the edges, the kind of tired you get from a long shift and feet that hurt. Not impressed by him, not nervous around him. Just a waitress looking at a customer. "Coffee for you?" "Yes," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Please." She left. He looked across the table at his daughter, who was carefully adding another sugar packet to the structure, her tongue just slightly between her teeth in concentration. "You're doing good," he said, because he needed to say something and he didn't know what else to say. Lily added the packet without looking up, but she didn't stop building. Hannah came back with coffee and a glass of milk, and she set the milk next to Lily without commenting on it, just placed it there like it belonged. She refilled the sugar packets from a little container she'd brought because she'd apparently noticed that Lily was using them up in the construction project. Damien watched this and thought, she noticed. He asked for scrambled eggs and toast and didn't taste any of it. He kept his eyes mostly on his daughter, who ate half her pancakes, which was more than she'd eaten at a single meal in 2 weeks, and who talked to Hannah twice more when the waitress swung back by the table. Once to say the blueberries were good, once to ask in that same near whisper if the sugar packet house could have a second floor. "Structurally, it's a challenge," Hannah said, considering it. "But I think you've got the engineering skills for it." The second floor collapsed twice and then stood. When the check came, Damien put his card down and then sat there for a moment, looking at the table. He was not a man who acted on impulse. He'd built his company through calculation, through patience, through understanding exactly what he was getting before he offered anything. He knew what he was doing was impulsive. He did it anyway. "Can I ask you something?" he said when Hannah returned with the receipt. She raised an eyebrow, cautious, not unfriendly. "Depends on the question." "How long have you worked here?" She tilted her head slightly. "About 2 years. Why? Do you have other jobs? Or is this what you do full-time?" The caution in her expression shifted into something more direct, a kind of flat look that said she'd heard variations of this before and didn't particularly enjoy them. "What exactly are you getting at?" "I'm asking because I need someone," he said, "for my daughter." He glanced at Lily, who had finished her pancakes and was now meticulously dismantling the sugar packet house, setting each one back into the container with careful precision. "She hasn't talked like that, to anyone, in a long time. You did something in about 6 minutes that I have not been able to do in 4 months. Hannah didn't say anything. She looked at Lily, then back at him. "I'll pay you 3 times whatever you make here," Damien said, "weekly, plus housing. You'd have your own suite in the house, Full staff support, benefits. I'm a waitress, Hannah said. Not unkindly, but clearly. I know. You don't even know my last name. Carter, he said. It's on the card you swiped. He'd looked. He knew it was a strange thing to do. He'd done it anyway. I'm Damien Ashcroft. She recognized the name. He could see it, the brief flicker. Most people who recognized the name got a look on their face, either impressed or calculating. Hannah Carter looked like someone who had just realized the situation was slightly more complicated than she'd thought. I'm not looking for a new job, she said. I'm not just offering a job. Then what are you offering? He didn't have a clean answer for that. He'd been asking himself the same question for 4 months, and the honest version of it was something like, I don't know what my daughter needs, but I know she responded to you the way she used to respond to her mother, and I would do anything, pay anything, become anything different from what I am right now if it meant she'd laugh again. He couldn't say that to a stranger in a diner. He had more pride than that, and also it was true in a way that felt too exposed to speak out loud. An arrangement, he said instead. Temporary, if you want. A week trial. You come, you see how it goes, you can leave at any point. Just like that. If it helps her, yes. Hannah looked at him for a long moment. He'd been in enough negotiations to know when someone was actually considering something versus when they were looking for the polite exit. She was actually considering it. I have shifts this week, she said. I'll cover whatever income you lose. You don't know how much I make. It doesn't matter. She let out a small breath through her nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite exasperated. Somewhere in between. It matters to me, she said. Okay, he said. Fair. She looked at Lily again. The little girl had lined up all the sugar packets in a row by color, white, pink, yellow, and was examining them like someone sorting inventory. It was the most organized, purposeful thing Damien had seen her do in months, this small sorting of sugar packets in a diner off the highway. He watched Hannah watch his daughter, and whatever he was hoping to see in her expression, calculation, pity, the specific brightness of someone seeing an opportunity, wasn't there. She just looked at Lily the way someone looks at a person they've already decided to care about. Simple as that. I'd have to give 2 weeks' notice, Hannah said. A week, he said. Trial. You don't owe me 2 weeks' notice on a trial. She turned back to him. Why did the other nannies quit? He paused. He could have said they weren't the right fit, or it was a mutual decision, or any of the things he'd said to the 3 people who'd asked him this in professional context. He said, she wouldn't talk to them. She'd go silent, and they'd try different things, and nothing worked, and eventually they ran out of ideas and left. And I don't blame any of them. But it didn't stop you from hiring the next one. No. And now you're in a diner asking a waitress. Yes. She looked at him steadily. He'd been looked at by people who wanted things from him his entire adult life, and he was good at reading those looks, and Hannah Carter's was not one of them. She looked like someone who was calculating risk and deciding whether she was the kind of person who walked away from things like this. Apparently she was not. 1 week, she said. I'm not promising anything beyond that. Understood. And I have a life. I have a sister. I'm not going to disappear into your house and cut off everything else. Of course. And I need... She stopped. Reorganized whatever she'd been about to say. I need to be able to tell you when something isn't right, without getting fired for it. He blinked. What? If I see something that concerns me, with Lily, with the house, with any of it, I need to be able to say so, without you deciding I've overstepped. He wasn't sure he'd ever had anyone lay out that condition before accepting a job with him. His employees were respectful, capable, appropriately boundaried. They did not, as a general rule, begin the negotiation by telling him he couldn't fire them for having opinions. Agreed, he said, because it was the right answer, and also because she was already half turning back toward the counter, and he understood that this was not someone who would wait. She nodded, pulled out a receipt pad, not the official check, just a blank sheet, and wrote a phone number on it, tore it off, slid it across the table to him. Text me the address. I'll come Friday. He picked up the paper. Lily, without looking up from her sugar packet, said, Hannah? Both adults went still. Lily looked up at Hannah, and her expression was the most unguarded thing Damien had seen on his daughter's face in 8 months. Just a child looking at someone she'd decided to trust, with all the terrifying simplicity of a child's judgment. She reached out and held onto a corner of Hannah's apron, just 2 fingers, barely anything. But she held on. Hannah looked down at that small hand. Something moved across her face. Not sentiment exactly, more like recognition. The specific feeling of being chosen by someone who has very few people to choose from. She reached down and covered Lily's hand with hers, briefly. "I'll see you Friday," she said, and she meant it. Damien drove home in the rain. Lily buckled in the back seat, and she fell asleep somewhere around exit 61. Real sleep, not the thin half-rest she'd been managing in her own bed for weeks. Her head tipped sideways against the window, and her breathing went slow and even, and he drove the rest of the way with the radio off, watching the road and thinking about a woman in worn-out shoes who'd slid into a diner booth uninvited and built a house out of sugar packets. He didn't know anything about her. He had her phone number and her last name and the memory of the way she'd said good instinct like she meant it. His house would be waiting for him, all 12,000 square feet of it, cleaned and staffed and perfectly maintained and quieter than any space that size had any right to be. He would carry Lily inside, take off her shoes, set her in her bed. He would stand in her doorway for a moment, the way he always did, half in and half out, and then he would go downstairs and sit in his office and not sleep for most of the night. But somewhere between the highway and the exit for home, something shifted slightly. Not much, just enough to notice. His daughter was breathing in the back seat. She had eaten half her pancakes. She had said 4 words to a stranger. Friday was 3 days away. He drove toward it. Hannah showed up on Friday at 10 in the morning, which was earlier than Damien had expected. She had a single bag, not a suitcase, just a large canvas duffel with a broken zipper that she'd safety pinned shut. And she stood at the iron gate of the Ashcroft estate, looking up at it with an expression that was hard to read. Not awe, exactly. More like a person doing a quiet calculation about whether they'd made the right decision and choosing, for now, to withhold judgment. The gate opened before she had to press anything. Someone inside had been watching. The driveway was longer than she'd anticipated. She walked it because there was no car waiting, which she found out later was an oversight. The estate manager had assumed she'd arrived by car service and hadn't arranged pickup. It was the first of many small ways the house communicated that it was built for people who moved through the world differently than Hannah Carter did. The house itself stopped her for a moment when it came into full view around the last bend of the driveway. She'd known it would be large. Knowing and seeing were different things. It was the kind of structure that had been designed not just to shelter people, but to announce something, and whatever it was announcing, it was saying it at considerable volume. Stone facade, 3 stories, east and west wings that stretched out like arms that weren't quite embracing and weren't quite blocking the way in, somewhere uncomfortable between. A woman was standing on the front steps. Not Damien, not Lily. A woman in her early 60s in a cream-colored cardigan, silver hair pulled back, posture that had been maintained by decades of deliberate effort. She had the kind of face that had probably been beautiful in a sharp, particular way 40 years ago and had not softened with age so much as compressed. The same features, just denser somehow, more decided. "You must be the waitress," the woman said. Hannah stopped on the bottom step. "Hannah Carter," she said. "And you are?" A pause that was slightly too long to be accidental. "Evelyn Ashcroft, Damien's mother." She looked Hannah over in the unhurried way of someone who believes they have the right to look. The canvas bag, the safety pin, the jacket that had seen several winters. "My son didn't mention you were quite so young." "He didn't mention you at all," Hannah said pleasantly. Evelyn's expression didn't change, which Hannah suspected was its own kind of response. "He's on a call. He'll be available in an hour. Mrs. Poole will show you to your room." She turned to go back inside, then paused with one hand on the doorframe. "I'd ask that you not rearrange anything in the common spaces. The household has a system." "Of course," Hannah said. She followed Mrs. Poole, a small, efficient woman in her 50s, who communicated primarily through the precise angle of her eyebrows, through a foyer with floors that reflected the light and up a staircase that was wide enough to drive a car through. The guest suite she was given was on the second floor, east wing, with a window that looked out over a garden that had been immaculately maintained and had the specific emptiness of a space that no one actually used. The room was beautiful. Hannah set her duffel on the floor next to the bed and sat down on the edge of the mattress. Too soft, she noted, the kind of soft that would probably wreck her back, and looked around at the crown molding and the coordinated linens and the fresh flowers in a vase on the dresser that no one had put there for her specifically. They were just always there. That was the kind of house this was, and she thought about the apartment she shared with her sister, where the heater made a sound like someone arguing in another room, and then she stopped that line of thought because it wasn't useful. She unpacked her bag. It didn't take long. Lily found her before Damien did. Hannah had been standing at the window looking out at the garden when she heard the door, which she'd left slightly open, push wider, and she turned to find a small person in yellow pajamas standing in the doorway with bed hair and the particular expression of a child who has been awake for a while but hasn't told anyone. She was holding the stuffed rabbit loosely by one ear. Hannah hadn't known about the rabbit. She'd learn later what it meant that Lily had it. "Hi," Hannah said. "Hi," Lily said. "You're still in your pajamas." Lily looked down at them. "Mrs. Poole said breakfast is at 8. "What time is it?" 8:40. "Did you eat?" A pause. "A little." Hannah looked at her. "What's a little?" Lily held up 2 fingers close together. 2 bites? Lily nodded, unapologetic, watching Hannah with that direct, unblinking attention that small children deploy without any awareness of how it lands on adults. Hannah had noticed it at the diner, that quality of Lily's focus, the way she looked at things she'd decided mattered. "Okay," Hannah said. "Do you want to show me the kitchen? I don't know where anything is yet." Lily considered this like it was a meaningful question. Then she stepped back from the doorway to make room and waited. The kitchen was large and very clean and had a professional range that made Hannah briefly envious in a purely practical way. She found bread and eggs in a pan without too much difficulty, while Lily sat on a stool at the island and watched. Hannah scrambled the eggs without asking what Lily wanted, because she'd already decided she'd eat whatever Hannah made, and that turned out to be correct. Lily ate the eggs and 2 pieces of toast and half a glass of orange juice without being asked to, sitting at the island with the rabbit propped against the fruit bowl beside her. They didn't talk much. That was fine. Hannah had learned a long time ago that silence with a child is not the same as silence with an adult. A child's quiet is usually companionable rather than withdrawn, and Lily's especially was. She wasn't absent. She was just watching, processing, deciding things. "The rabbit has a name?" Hannah asked, nodding at it. "Elliot," Lily said. "Good name." "My mom picked it." Hannah paused for just a half second, the way you do when something shifts the floor slightly under you. "Elliot's a good rabbit," she said. "Does he eat eggs?" Lily looked at the rabbit, back at Hannah. "He's stuffed." "That's probably why he's not hungry," Hannah said. Lily's mouth did the thing it had done at the diner, that almost smile that kept almost becoming something more. "You're funny," she said, as though this was an unexpected finding she was filing away. "Don't tell anyone," Hannah said. "I have a reputation to maintain." This time Lily actually smiled, small, real, aimed at the plate in front of her as though she didn't quite want Hannah to see it directly. But it was there. Damien found them in the kitchen 20 minutes later. He stopped in the doorway the same way people stop when they see something they weren't prepared for. His daughter was at the island with egg on her plate and the rabbit beside her, and she was telling Hannah something about the garden. How there was a section near the east wall where the groundskeeper let the weeds grow, because Lily had asked him to, because she wanted to see what would come up on its own. "The morning glory came up on its own," Lily was saying. "Mr. Torres said it does that. It just decides." "Plants do that," Hannah said. "They're stubborn. I respect that." Lily noticed her father in the doorway, and her expression did something complicated. Not closed, not unhappy, but different. The specific way children recalibrate when the adult with authority enters the room. "Good morning," Damien said. He looked at the plate, at the empty glass. Something moved behind his eyes that he controlled before it reached the rest of his face, but Hannah saw it anyway. "You're eating." "Hannah made eggs," Lily said. I see that. He looked at Hannah over his daughter's head, and his expression said something that his voice wasn't going to say, which was thank you, in a register too full to be spoken casually at 8:40 on a Friday morning in front of a child. There's more if you want, Hannah said, and turned back to the pan. He did want. He stood at the counter and ate standing up, the way someone eats when they've forgotten that sitting down is an option, and Hannah watched him out of the corner of her eye and thought, this man hasn't taken a breath in months. The morning settled. Lily showed Hannah the garden. The morning glory along the east wall, as promised, a tangle of purple and white that had seeded itself into a gap between the stones with complete indifference to anyone's plans. Lily crouched down and showed Hannah which ones had opened and which ones were still closed. They open with the sun, Lily said, and close when it's dark. Like they're paying attention, Hannah said. Lily nodded seriously. Mr. Torres says they track the light. Smart system, Hannah said. Does your apartment have a garden? No, I've got a window box. I tried to grow basil last summer. It died in August. Lily looked up at her. What did you do wrong? Overwatered it, apparently. Turns out you can care about something too much and still kill it. She'd said it without thinking about it. Just an observation. Casual. The kind of thing you say when you're talking about plants. She noticed Lily go quiet after it, the way the child sometimes went somewhere private behind her own eyes. Hannah didn't press. They were inside by lunch, and that was when Hannah first encountered Richard Okafor. He was the Ashcroft family's chief administrator, a title that seemed to cover an elastic range of responsibilities, all of which appeared to involve knowing exactly what was happening in every corner of the estate at all times. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, compact and precise, in a dark suit that seemed professionally resistant to wrinkles, and he appeared in the doorway of the sitting room where Hannah and Lily were doing a puzzle with the specific energy of someone who'd been waiting for the right moment and had decided this was it. Miss Carter, he said, do you have a moment? Lily looked up from the puzzle. Hannah touched her shoulder. Give me 5 minutes. She followed Okafor into the hallway, and he turned and looked at her with an expression that was professionally neutral and conveyed beneath that neutrality a clear and organized skepticism. I want to be straightforward with you, he said. Please, Hannah said. Mr. Ashcroft is a generous man, and his daughter's well-being is genuinely his priority. But this household operates with considerable public scrutiny. What happens here and who comes and goes, who spends time with Lily, reflects on the family and on the business. Okay, Hannah said. A waitress with no professional childcare certification, no verifiable background in child development. He knows what my background is, Hannah said. Your professional background, yes. There are other kinds. He paused, just slightly. I've done some preliminary research. I want to give you the opportunity to be forthcoming before anyone else raises questions. Hannah looked at him steadily. She knew what he'd found, or at least she could guess at the shape of it. She'd been half expecting this since she pulled up the driveway. That's thorough of you, she said. It's my job. Then do it, she said. If you have questions, ask them directly. I'm not going to perform nervousness to make you more comfortable. Something shifted in his expression. Not respect exactly, but a recalibration. You have a criminal record, he said. I do. Would you like to explain it? Not to you, Hannah said. I'll explain it to Damien when it's appropriate. That's not me hiding it. It's me being clear about who I owe an explanation to. Okafor looked at her for a moment longer. All right, he said, and he left, which surprised her slightly. She'd expected more push. She filed that away for later. Back in the sitting room, Lily had placed 3 puzzle pieces and was studying the 4th with great seriousness. She didn't ask what the conversation had been about. Hannah sat back down on the floor next to her and picked up a piece from the edge of the pile. He doesn't like new people, Lily said without looking up. Does he tell you that? He just gets very formal, Lily said. He gets formal when he doesn't know what to do. Hannah looked at the 6-year-old. You're very observant, she said. Lily shrugged one shoulder. My mom said that too. She fit the piece into place. She said I got it from her. The afternoon was uneventful, which was its own kind of event in a house that had apparently decided that quiet was the safest emotional register. Hannah read with Lily after the puzzle. A chapter book about a girl who trained horses. which Lily listened to with the same focused attention she gave to everything, asking occasional questions that demonstrated she'd retained every detail from the previous chapter. Damien appeared in the late afternoon, loosened his tie as he came through the door, and sat in the armchair across from them in a way that suggested he'd meant to stop by briefly and then found he didn't want to leave. He stayed for the rest of the chapter. That evening, after Lily was in bed, Hannah had done the bedtime routine, which Lily apparently found acceptable, drifting off mid-sentence in the horse book with Elliot tucked under her arm. Hannah came downstairs to find Evelyn Ashcroft in the sitting room with a glass of wine and the deliberate posture of someone who had been waiting. "She went down all right?" Evelyn asked. "Fine," Hannah said, out by the third page. That's more than she's managed in months." A pause. Evelyn turned the stem of the glass between two fingers. "I'm not saying that to compliment you." "I know," Hannah said. "I'm saying it because it confuses me. What you did, what you're doing, it doesn't make sense as a strategy. You have no training, you have no experience, you're not doing anything I can identify as a method." "I'm not using a method," Hannah said. "Then what are you doing?" Hannah thought about it honestly. "Paying attention," she said. "Mostly." Evelyn made a sound that was not quite dismissive and not quite impressed. "My daughter-in-law was good at that," she said, and then seemed to decide she'd offered more than she intended. She looked back at her wine. Hannah said goodnight and went upstairs. She lay in the too-soft bed for a while, looking at the ceiling, thinking about the house and the people in it, and the way silence here had a different texture than the silence in her apartment. Fuller somehow, packed with things that hadn't been said for so long they'd taken up permanent residence. She thought about what Okafor had found and what Damien would say when she told him. And she thought about the way Lily had held onto her apron in the diner with 2 fingers, the lightest possible grip, as if she didn't want to ask for too much. She fell asleep to the sound of the house settling around her, all 12,000 square feet of it sighing in the dark. She had been there 4 days when she found the room. It wasn't hidden in any deliberate sense. There was no locked door, no covered keyhole. It was at the end of the West Wing hallway, and the door was simply kept closed, which in this household communicated something. Every other door stood open at least partially, as though the house needed to breathe through its spaces. This one didn't. She'd been looking for extra blankets because Lily had woken at 3 a.m. cold, and half dreaming and hadn't wanted to wake her father, had come instead to Hannah's door and stood there small and silent until Hannah pulled her inside. They'd found enough blankets in the linen closet, but Hannah had made a note to find more, and that note was what brought her to the West Wing on Tuesday afternoon while Lily was with Mr. Torres in the garden. She tried the door expecting a supply closet. It opened easily. What she found was not a supply closet. The room was furnished. A small sitting area, a bookshelf, a writing desk along the far wall with a chair pushed in. A camera bag hung on a hook near the door. On the desk, a coffee mug that still had a ring stain on it, a notepad with handwriting she didn't recognize, a framed photograph facing slightly away from her. The air had the particular quality of a space that no one had opened in a long time. Not unpleasant, just sealed, like the inside of a book you find at the back of a shelf. She understood immediately what the room was and that she shouldn't be standing in it. She started to back out, but she saw the recorder. It was a small digital voice recorder, the kind journalists use, sitting on the edge of the bookshelf between 2 stacks of books. And it had a piece of tape on it with a handwritten label. Lily. Story, March. She didn't touch it. She stood in the doorway for a moment and then pulled the door back to how she'd found it and went to find more blankets elsewhere. She didn't tell anyone what she'd found that day or the next. It was Lily who found it. Not through Hannah. Lily had apparently known the room existed, known something was kept there in the vague way that children know things without fully understanding what they know. On Wednesday afternoon, while Damien was in a meeting and Evelyn was on a call with someone in the city, Lily appeared next to Hannah at the kitchen counter and said, without any preamble, "There's a room in the West Wing." Hannah kept her hands on the carrots she was cutting. "Yeah? With my mom's stuff." Hannah set down the knife. She turned to look at Lily, who was standing at the edge of the counter with Elliot under her arm, looking at the middle distance rather than at Hannah. "Have you ever been inside?" Hannah asked. "Once," Lily said. "A long time ago. Before everyone stopped going there." What happened when you went? Mrs. Poole cried, Lily said, and she took me back to my room, and after that the door stayed closed. Hannah looked at this child, 6 years old, matter of fact, about being carried away from her own mother's belongings by someone who couldn't hold it together, and felt something old and specific move through her chest, the kind of feeling that comes from recognizing a situation you already know from the inside. Do you want to go in? Hannah asked. Lily was quiet for a moment. Is it okay? I think, Hannah said carefully, that you have more right to be in that room than anyone else in this house. Lily looked at her then. Something in her face settled, like she'd been waiting for someone to say that and hadn't known she was waiting. Okay, Lily said. They went together, mid-afternoon, the hallway quiet and the light coming in through the west windows at a low angle that made the wood floor look warm. Hannah opened the door and stepped back so Lily could go in first. Lily stood in the center of the room for a moment. She looked at the desk, the camera bag, the bookshelf. She went to the framed photograph on the desk, the one Hannah had avoided looking at directly, and picked it up and held it in both hands. Hannah, from the doorway, could see it now. A woman in her late 20s, dark hair pulled back, laughing at something off camera with the unguarded quality of someone who didn't know they were being photographed or didn't care. She had Lily's eyes, or Lily had hers. She was funny, Lily said, like actually funny, not pretend funny. Yeah? She did voices when she read to me, different voices for every character. Lily set the photograph back down carefully, facing out the way it was meant to face. Dad tried to do it once after. He's not very good at voices. That's honest. She would have thought it was funny that he tried, Lily said, and then quietly, he doesn't really talk about her. I know, Hannah said. Lily moved to the bookshelf. Her hand found the recorder without hesitation, as though she'd known exactly where it was, which perhaps she had. Perhaps she'd been in here more than once, in small, quiet moments that no one knew about. She held it up. What is this? Hannah crossed the room and looked at the label. Lily. Story. March. I think it's a recording, she said. Of what? Hannah thought about the handwriting on the tape, the careful label, the specificity of it, story, and felt something close in her throat. I think, she said slowly, it might be your mom reading you a story. Lily looked at the recorder in her hands. Her expression was not grief. It was something more complicated than that, more like standing at the edge of a door and understanding that whatever is on the other side will change the shape of things. Can we listen? She asked. Hannah heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Damien was in the doorway. She didn't know how long he'd been there. Long enough, from the look on his face, to understand exactly what he was seeing. His daughter standing in his late wife's room, holding the recorder, with Hannah Carter beside her. His expression was the kind that happens when something breaks open that has been sealed for a very long time. Not anger, not grief exactly, or not only that, more like a man who has been holding his breath for 8 months and suddenly cannot remember why. Damien, Hannah said, and her voice was steady, not because she felt steady, but because someone in the room needed to be. He looked at her, then at Lily, then at the recorder in his daughter's hands. Lily looked up at her father and held the recorder out toward him, both hands, the same way she'd handed him things since she was small. A complete offering, no conditions. It has her voice, Lily said. Can we hear it? The room was very quiet. Outside, somewhere in the garden, a bird was going about its business without any concern for what was happening inside. The afternoon light came through the window and landed across the desk, across the photograph, across the coffee ring that was still there after all this time. Damien's jaw moved. He looked at the recorder for a long moment, and Hannah watched the thing move through him. The wanting and the fear of it, the 8 months of choosing not to come through this door playing out against the sight of his 6-year-old daughter holding out her hands. He crossed the room. He took the recorder from Lily gently, and he turned it in his hands once, looking at the label his wife had written, the handwriting she'd had since college that leaned slightly to the right, as if it was in a hurry to get somewhere. Then he sat down on the edge of the sitting area's small couch, and Lily climbed up next to him without being asked, and he pressed play. The voice that came out of the small speaker was clear and warm and slightly amused. The way someone sounds when they know the person they're talking to is going to love this part. She was reading a story about a fox and a river and a bet that went wrong, and she did the voices. Different voices for every character, exactly as Lily had said. And the fox had a particular little grunt when he was scheming that made Lily, sitting against her father's side, make a sound that was half laugh and half something she was trying to hold back. Damien sat very still with his eyes on the middle distance. Hannah stood in the doorway of the room and let them have it, this moment that had been sitting in this room for months, waiting for someone to be brave enough to open the door. She leaned against the frame and listened to a dead woman read a story about a fox to her daughter, in a voice that was full of life, and she thought, they've been starving in here, every one of them, and they've had food on the shelf the whole time. When the recording ended, the room was quiet again. Lily was pressed into her father's side with her face turned in, not crying, just there. Damien had his arm around her, and he was looking at nothing in particular with the expression of a man who has just set down something very heavy and isn't sure yet how his hands feel without the weight of it. He looked up at Hannah eventually. She didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that the room hadn't already said. He nodded at her once, the barest motion. She nodded back. Outside, the morning glory on the east wall was closed now. The sun had moved, and the flowers had followed it, the way they did, tracking the light wherever it went, regardless of who was watching. The week trial became 2 weeks without anyone formally saying so. Damien didn't offer an extension, and Hannah didn't ask for one. It happened the way most things in that house happened, not through conversation, but through the quiet accumulation of days, through Lily waking up in the morning and coming to Hannah's door first, through the eggs and the puzzle pieces, and the afternoon hours in the garden where the morning glory kept opening and closing on its own reliable schedule. By the time the original 7 days had passed, the question of whether Hannah was staying felt less like a decision and more like a fact that had already arranged itself while no one was paying attention. She called her sister on the 9th day. Claire was 26 and living in a one-bedroom in Providence that Hannah helped pay for every month. And she picked up on the second ring the way she always did when Hannah called, as though she'd been waiting near the phone. "You're still there," Claire said. It wasn't a question. "I'm still here," Hannah said. She was standing at the window in her room, looking out at the garden in the early dark, the shapes of things just visible. "How's the job?" "Fine." "Hannah?" "Yeah." "Are you okay?" Hannah thought about that honestly. "I think so," she said. "It's complicated. Is the kid okay?" "She's getting better." A pause. "She laughed today. Like, actually laughed. Not just the almost laugh thing." Her dad was trying to do a voice for the horse book, and he sounded like someone had stepped on a cat, and she just completely lost it. Claire was quiet for a moment. "That's good," she said, and meant it. "What about you? Are they treating you okay?" "The grandmother hates me," Hannah said. "The administrator has definitely run a background check on me. Damien is—" She stopped. "Damien is what?" "He's not what I expected," she said, which was the most accurate and the least explanatory answer she could give. Claire made a sound that communicated she had cataloged this response and would be returning to it later. "Just be careful," she said. "Okay, you're not there to fix everybody." "I know," Hannah said. "You always know," Claire said. "You just don't always act like you know." Hannah didn't argue with this because it was true. She hadn't expected to think about Damien as much as she did. That part was inconvenient, and she was aware of it in the way you're aware of a stone in your shoe. Not crippling, but present, with the specific quality of something you can't stop noticing once you've noticed it. He was not an easy person. He was not warm in the way that made you immediately comfortable. He had the habit of going very quiet when he was thinking, the kind of quiet that in another person might read as disengagement, but in him read as density. Too much happening inside to bother with surface signals. He forgot to eat. He stood in doorways a lot, half in and half out of rooms, as if he hadn't quite decided whether he was coming or going. He was also, she had observed, trying very hard. That part she hadn't expected. Not trying in the way of someone performing effort for an audience. Trying in the private way, the imperfect way, showing up for the horsebook chapter even when he clearly didn't understand half the equestrian references, asking Lily about the morning glory with genuine if slightly awkward interest, stopping by the kitchen in the evenings and finding reasons to stay that both of them pretended weren't reasons. He was a man rebuilding a habit that grief had interrupted, which was the habit of being present, and he was doing it badly and consistently, which Hannah had come to think was the only way that actually worked. None of that made things simpler. Richard Okafor made his move on a Thursday. It was morning, just past 9, and Lily was with Mr. Torres in the garden while Hannah was in the library looking for a specific book Lily had requested, something about ocean animals, which the library apparently had 3 of, when Okafor appeared in the doorway with a tablet in his hand and his expression calibrated to something between concern and authority. "I need to speak with you," he said. "You're speaking with me," Hannah said without looking up from the shelf. He came into the room and set the tablet down on the reading table. On the screen was a document, legal, formatted, with her name at the top. Hannah recognized the case number before she read another word. She straightened and turned to face him. "I told you I'd explain it to Damien," she said. "Mr. Ashcroft has a responsibility to Lily's welfare that supersedes any personal arrangement he's made with you," Okafor said. "A criminal record involving violations of a court order." "You've read the record," Hannah said. "So you know what the order was?" I know what the official record states." "Then you know it was a restraining order obtained by an abusive man trying to keep his wife from leaving him. And you know I violated it by helping her leave." She looked at him steadily. "My sister, specifically, she was 22. He'd been hitting her for a year. The police had been to the apartment 4 times and done nothing." She paused. "So yes, I violated a court order, and I'd do it again." The room was quiet. Okafor looked at her across the table. His expression had changed. Not softened exactly, but something in the compression of it had loosened, the way a fist doesn't fully open but releases some of its tension. "I'm not unsympathetic," he said, "but my job is to protect this family." "Then protect them from things that are actually dangerous," Hannah said. "I'm not one of them." He picked up the tablet. "I've already sent this to Mr. Ashcroft." She'd been expecting this. She'd been expecting it since the first day, if she was honest. "When?" she asked. "This morning. An hour ago." Hannah nodded. She pulled the Ocean Animals book from the shelf and the 2 books beside it that were also on the subject, because Lily would want to know there were options. "Okay," she said. She walked out of the library, leaving Okafor standing in it. She found Damien in his office on the 2nd floor, standing at the window the way he stood when he was working through something, not pacing, just still with his hands in his pockets and his weight slightly forward as if he was watching something outside rather than thinking. She knocked on the open door. He turned. "Okafor talked to you," she said. "He sent me the report," Damien said. "Come in." She came in. She didn't sit. He hadn't sat either, and sitting felt like a concession she didn't want to make. She stood in the middle of the room with the 3 ocean books under her arm and said, "Ask me what you want to know." He looked at her for a moment. "Your sister," he said. "Claire. She's 26 now. She lives in Providence. She teaches elementary school." A pause. "She didn't go back to him, in case that's relevant. Is she okay?" Hannah blinked. That was not the question she'd been preparing for. "Yes," she said. "She's fine. She's good, actually." Damien nodded slowly. He looked down at the floor between them, then back up. "How long were you on probation?" 18 months. "How long ago was this?" 4 years. He was quiet for a moment. Not the calculating kind of quiet, the working through something kind. "Okafor thinks I should let you go," he said. "I know. He's concerned about media exposure. Someone gets hold of this record, it becomes a story. Billionaire employs convicted felon to care for young daughter." He said it flatly, without editorializing, as though he was reading from a risk assessment. "That's a fair concern," Hannah said, because it was. "Yeah." He looked at her. "It's also not the only thing I'm considering." She waited. "You could have told me," he said, "before Friday. You had 3 days." "I know," she said. "Why didn't you?" She thought about how to answer that honestly. Because I wanted you to see what I was like with Lily before you made a decision based on a piece of paper, she said. That's not a great reason. I know it put you in a harder position, but that's the honest answer. He absorbed this. He didn't look pleased exactly. He also didn't look like a man about to tell her to leave. My mother was arrested once, he said. 1988. She got into a fight with a country club member who made a remark about Damien's grandfather. A pause. She won the fight, technically. Hannah looked at him. Are you comparing? No, he said. I'm just noting that records don't always tell you what they seem to. He walked to his desk and sat down, which was the first time she'd seen him sit at it since she'd arrived. He conducted most of his calls standing and read his documents at the window. You stay, he said. Okafor will handle the media question if it comes up. That's what he's paid for. And if he's not comfortable with that? He'll manage, Damien said. He's managed worse. Hannah shifted the books in her arms. I want to be clear that I wasn't hiding it from you indefinitely, she said. I was going to tell you. When? When it felt necessary. She paused. Which is now, I guess. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the shape a smile makes before a person decides not to complete it. Lily's in the garden? He asked, with Mr. Torres looking at what's come up along the east wall. She likes it out there. He said it to himself as much as to her, the way you say something you're reminding yourself is true. She used to like it out there. Hannah didn't fill the pause. She was learning when to leave the spaces open. Thank you, he said, for being straight with me. Always, she said, and she meant it. She took the ocean books out to Lily, and the morning continued. It was the following Thursday when Hannah noticed Damien was gone. Not gone. His car was in the drive, his meetings had run as scheduled in the morning. But after lunch, he simply wasn't there. And his assistant, a young woman named Priya, who operated with the focused efficiency of someone powered by anxiety and excellent coffee, said only that he had a personal errand on Thursday afternoons and usually returned by 4. Hannah filed it away. She didn't ask. The next Thursday, she paid attention. He left at 1:15, alone, no driver. He was back by 3:45 with damp hair and a different jacket from the one he'd left in. He went directly upstairs without stopping in the kitchen the way he usually did when he came home, as though he needed the buffer of some time alone before he could be around other people again. Hannah thought about the damp hair. She thought about it for 3 days. On the third Thursday, she followed him. Not closely. She was behind by a quarter mile for most of it, far enough that it was plausibly coincidental if he'd checked the mirror, which he didn't, because Damien Ashcroft was not a man who expected to be followed. She watched his car turn into a municipal lot and watched him get out and walk, not in the direction of any restaurant or office building, but toward the community center at the end of the block. She waited 5 minutes. She went in. The reception desk directed her toward the indoor pool on the south side without her even asking. She'd said she was looking for the aquatics facility, and the woman at the desk pointed without looking up. The hallway leading to the pool had the specific smell of chlorine and damp concrete that doesn't belong to any other place in the world. And through the window in the door, she could see the lanes, the overhead lights throwing flat white reflections off the surface of the water. Damien was sitting in the bleachers. He wasn't swimming. He wasn't watching anyone swim. At this time on a Thursday, the lap lanes were mostly empty, a couple of older women at the far end doing a slow back and forth. He was just sitting, elbows on his knees, looking at the water, the way you sit with something you can't put down and can't hold properly either. Hannah stood at the window for a moment. Then she pushed the door open and went in. The smell hit her fully. Chlorine, humidity, the hollow acoustic of water and tile. Damien looked up when he heard her. His expression went through several things in rapid succession. Surprise, then something guarded, then something that resigned itself quickly, because he understood, she thought, that there was no version of this moment where he could convincingly pretend to be somewhere normal for a normal reason. Hannah, he said. Hey, she said. She walked over and sat down in the bleachers, 1 row below him and 3 feet to his left. Not next to him, not across the room. He looked at the pool. She looked at the pool. A minute passed. Her name was Serena, he said, finally. Not explaining himself, just starting, The way you start when you've been not talking about something for so long that the words want to come out in whatever shape they can manage. She taught swimming lessons here, Tuesdays and Saturdays, kids 6 to 12. He paused. That's how we met, actually. I brought Lily for lessons when she was 4. Serena was the instructor. She told me Lily was a natural, and I said I wasn't surprised, and she looked at me like I was exactly the kind of parent she'd been warned about. Hannah almost smiled. And I was apparently exactly the kind of parent she'd been warned about. He rubbed the back of his neck. I asked her to dinner 4 times before she said yes. She said the first 3 times I'd asked like I was used to people saying yes, and she wanted to see if I could handle rejection. Could you? Barely, he said. But I came back a 4th time, which she said was the only thing that convinced her I was serious. He was quiet for a moment. She was the most direct person I'd ever met. She said what she thought. She didn't calibrate it for the room she was in. He looked at the water. Lily has that from her, that straightforwardness. Hannah let the silence sit for a moment. Then she asked, "What happened?" She'd read nothing, hadn't looked it up, hadn't asked anyone. She wanted to hear it from him. He took a breath. It was a Saturday in October. Lily was sick, just a cold, nothing serious, but Serena didn't want to leave her. I told her to go, that I'd handle Lily, that she shouldn't cancel on her students for a cold. I basically argued her into going. He stopped. His hands moved and then stopped. There was construction near the community center. They'd had it fenced off for 2 weeks, but something failed on the south side. A section of scaffolding came down. 3 people on the sidewalk were injured. He paused, a long pause. She was the only one who didn't walk away. The pool was quiet. The 2 women at the far end had stopped swimming and were talking to each other at the wall, their voices carrying in the acoustics of the space without the words being clear. I told her to go, Damien said. That's the part I keep landing on. She didn't want to leave Lily. I told her to go. You didn't know, Hannah said. No, he said. I didn't know. He said it like he'd said it to himself 1,000 times, and it kept failing to do what it was supposed to do. But I was the reason she was on that sidewalk at that time. Hannah looked at him for a moment. Can I say something? You're going to either way, he said, and there was no edge in it. Just the faintest trace of the humor she'd started to see appear occasionally, thin and dry, and usually aimed at himself. That's exactly the kind of thing Serena would have hated you thinking, Hannah said, based on everything you've told me about her. He looked at her. You said she was direct. You said she said what she thought. You said she argued with you about things that mattered to her. Hannah met his eyes. You genuinely think a woman like that would want you sitting in this bleacher every Thursday, burning yourself down for a decision that was normal and reasonable and that any person would have made? He didn't answer. You convinced her of nothing, Hannah said. She decided to go. She was an adult who made a choice. You're taking something that was an accident and turning it into a punishment you gave yourself. And I think you know that. I think you've always known that. I think that's why you keep coming here. Not to remember her, but because you feel like you have to keep paying for something. She paused. And I think she'd be furious at you for it. The silence that followed was the specific kind that happens when something true enters a room and neither person quite knows what to do with it yet. Damien looked at the pool for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Not broken, not emotional in the outward performance sense, but something underneath it had shifted, some load-bearing wall of the thing he'd been maintaining. She would be, he said quietly. Yeah, she would absolutely be furious. Hannah didn't say anything else. She sat with him in the bleachers of the community pool, where Serena Ashcroft had once taught 6-year-olds not to be afraid of the water, and the overhead lights made their flat reflections on the surface, and the 2 women at the far end pushed off the wall and started swimming again, back and forth, back and forth. After a while, Damien asked, How did you know to follow me? The damp hair, Hannah said. He looked at her sideways. You're very observant, he said, and the echo of it, Lily's word, said to Hannah in the kitchen, You're very observant, moved between them without either of them saying so. I got it from someone, Hannah said. They drove back to the house separately. At dinner, Lily ate everything on her plate and told her father a fact she'd learned from the ocean book about how octopuses have 3 hearts. And Damien said that seemed like overkill. And Lily said maybe humans needed more hearts. And Hannah said she thought some people were already running a deficit. And Evelyn, who had taken to appearing at dinner with the resigned air of someone joining an event she hadn't quite agreed to, made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. The house that night was different in a way Hannah couldn't fully articulate. Not warmer exactly, not lighter, more like a pressure that had been maintained for so long that its slight decrease was perceptible even in its absence, the way your ears adjust when a sound you've stopped hearing stops. She was in the hallway after dinner when Okafor stopped her. "I owe you an apology," he said. She turned. He was standing there with none of the tablet and none of the authority of his previous appearances, just a man in a suit at the end of a long day, slightly diminished in the way people get when they've reconsidered something. "For which part?" she asked. "All of it," he said. "The way I went to Damien. I should have come to you first, the way you asked me to." He paused. "You were right that I was protecting old secrets because it felt like protecting the family. I'm not sure those are the same thing anymore." Hannah looked at him. He was not a man comfortable with this kind of admission. She could see the effort in it, the slight stiffness of words being said that didn't come easily. She respected that. "It matters that you said it," she said. He nodded. He turned to go. "Okafor," she said. He paused. "The record, the restraining order case. Is there anything in it that could be reframed? Legally, I mean. I've thought about it over the years, whether there's any avenue." "I looked into it," he said. And then, which surprised her, "I can make some calls. No promises." She hadn't expected that. "Thank you," she said. He nodded again and continued down the hallway, and his walk had something fractionally different about it. A man slightly less compressed than he'd been an hour ago. Upstairs, Lily was already in bed with Elliot and the ocean book, not reading it, but holding it, fingers over the cover, the way children hold things they've decided are important. She looked up when Hannah came in. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" Lily asked. "Yeah," Hannah said. She sat on the edge of the bed. "You want me to read?" "No," Lily said. "Just stay." So Hannah stayed. She sat in the quiet room with the child who had not been able to sleep for months. And after a while, Lily's breathing slowed and her hand loosened on the cover of the ocean book, and Elliot slid slightly to the side, and the house around them was as quiet as it ever was, which was still quite quiet, 12,000 square feet of it, full of things unsaid and photographs and a recorder with a voice on it, and 3 hearts worth of people trying, imperfectly and stubbornly, to find their way back to something like being alive. Hannah sat there for a while after Lily was asleep, because she'd told her she would stay, and she was not in the habit of taking that back. 3 weeks into what had originally been proposed as a 7-day trial, no one in the Ashcroft house was using the word temporary anymore. Not out loud, anyway. Hannah noticed this without remarking on it, the way you notice the absence of a sound you'd been hearing for so long you'd stopped registering it. The question of whether she'd be leaving had simply drifted out of the daily vocabulary of the house, replaced by smaller, more immediate things. Whether Lily had eaten enough at lunch, whether the east wall morning glory was spreading into the rose section and what Mr. Torres thought about that, whether Damien had remembered to eat anything before his 9 o'clock call, or if someone should leave something on his desk. That last one had become an informal responsibility Hannah had picked up without being asked. She'd started leaving a plate in his office in the mornings. Nothing elaborate, just toast and whatever fruit was cut, sometimes eggs if she was making them for Lily anyway. She left it on the corner of his desk where he wouldn't knock it over when he spread out his documents. He never mentioned it. The plates came back empty. It was a small thing. She was aware that it was a small thing. She was also aware that small things, maintained consistently over time, were not always small. Lily continued to improve in the incremental, nonlinear way of real recovery, rather than the clean upward arc of something being fixed. Some mornings she was almost entirely herself, talkative, curious, dragging Hannah out to the garden before breakfast to show her something Mr. Torres had pointed out the day before. Other mornings she woke up quiet in a way that had a different quality from her previous silence, less withdrawn than thoughtful, as though she was carrying something and choosing to carry it carefully rather than set it down. On those mornings, Hannah didn't push. She made breakfast and sat nearby and let Lily arrive at conversation when she was ready. Damien watched this and said nothing about it, but Hannah caught him watching, and she understood from the quality of his attention that he was taking notes in the way that people do when they're trying to learn something they realize they should have known how to do already. He was making efforts. They were imperfect and sometimes slightly misaligned. He still occasionally asked Lily questions in the tone of a man running a business meeting rather than talking to his child, and he still sometimes went for long stretches where the focus of his work pulled him so completely out of the house's emotional atmosphere that he surfaced at dinner with the slightly disoriented air of someone rejoining a conversation mid-sentence. But he tried. He showed up for the horse book. He asked about the morning glory with questions that had gotten more specific over the weeks. Genuine questions about what was growing and where. Not conversational maintenance, but actual interest that had developed somewhere along the way without his having planned for it. Hannah thought about what Claire had said. "You're not there to fix everybody." And she thought, I know that. She thought about it and kept making the toast anyway. The recorder had changed something in the house after that afternoon in the West Wing room. Not dramatically. There was no moment where everyone sat down and decided to be different, no formal reckoning. But the room itself was less sealed after that day. Mrs. Poole stopped avoiding the West Wing hallway with the pointed indirection of someone working hard not to look at something. Evelyn began occasionally mentioning Serena by name in conversation, small references, the kind that people make when they've decided that saying a name is no longer the same as opening a wound. Serena had a recipe for this. Serena would have known the right thing to plant there. Damien still went quiet when Serena came up in certain ways, the kind of quiet that came from somewhere deeper than social discomfort. But the going quiet had a different quality now, less like shutting a door, more like pausing at a threshold. Lily had listened to the recording twice more since that first afternoon. Both times she'd gone to her father and asked him to sit with her, and both times he had. And Hannah knew this because Lily told her afterward, matter-of-factly, in the way she reported things she wanted Hannah to know. She didn't ask Hannah to be there for those listenings. Hannah understood that those were for Lily and her father, and she was glad for it. It was on a Wednesday morning, exactly 23 days after Hannah's arrival, that Evelyn Ashcroft knocked on the door of the small sitting room where Hannah was sorting through a stack of library books Lily had apparently been accumulating under her bed for reasons that remained her own private project. Hannah looked up. Evelyn rarely came to her. Their interactions happened in shared spaces, usually with other people around, and maintained the particular quality of two people who have come to a functional truce without having formally negotiated the terms. "Do you have a moment?" Evelyn asked. "Sure." Hannah set down the library books. Evelyn came into the room and sat in the chair across from the small sofa where Hannah had been sorting. She sat the way she always sat, spine straight, hands organized in her lap. But something about her face was different this morning. Not softer exactly, more like a surface from which something that had been blocking the light had been partially removed. She didn't say anything immediately. She looked at the stack of library books, then at Hannah, then somewhere in between. "I owe you an explanation," she said finally. Hannah waited. "I was not kind to you when you arrived," Evelyn said, "and I've been aware of that. I want to be clear that I've been aware of it the entire time." She paused. "I didn't do it accidentally or without knowing what I was doing. I did it because I'd decided you didn't belong here, and I wanted you to know that clearly." "You made it clear," Hannah said. "Yes." Evelyn looked at her hands. "I've spent a good deal of my life deciding who belongs where. It's a family habit, I suppose. Where you come from, what you have, what you can offer. I was raised with those measures, and I applied them to everyone, including Damien's wife." Hannah went very still. "Serena came from a family with no money and no connections," Evelyn said. "She was a swimming instructor. She was wonderful, actually, in ways I spent too much time refusing to see because I was busy cataloging what she lacked." Her voice didn't break, but it compressed slightly, the way voices do when the person speaking them is applying pressure to keep them level. "I was not kind to her either. Not in the beginning, not in the middle. I was beginning, I think, to get there toward the end, and then there was no more time." The room was quiet. Outside, somewhere down the hall, Mrs. Poole was moving through the house with the quiet efficiency that was her particular form of presence. "I saw Serena when you walked up the driveway," Evelyn said. "Not literally, I'm not being sentimental. I mean, I recognized the situation. A woman from outside, what I consider my world, coming inside it, being given access to my grandchild. And I did exactly what I did the first time. I decided ahead of looking." Hannah absorbed this. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Because Lily laughed at dinner last night," Evelyn said. "She laughed so hard at whatever nonsense Damien said about the octopus that she knocked over her water glass, and she laughed harder at the water glass. And Damien caught it before it went off the table, and she looked at him, the way she used to look at him before." Evelyn stopped. "I've been waiting 8 months to see that look. And the reason it came back is sitting across from me." She met Hannah's eyes. "I don't think gratitude covers it, but it's what I have." Hannah looked at this woman, 70-something years of accumulated certainty about how the world was ordered, sitting across a stack of library books, telling the truth because she'd run out of reasons not to. It was not a comfortable portrait. It was also, Hannah thought, genuinely human in a way that Evelyn's earlier performances had not been. "You don't have to thank me," Hannah said. "I know I don't," Evelyn said. "I'm doing it anyway." "Then I accept it." A pause. "And for what it's worth, Serena sounds like she was worth a lot more than the time you gave her." Evelyn made a sound, quiet and controlled, that Hannah recognized after a moment as the sound of someone holding back something they'd been holding back for quite a while. "She was," Evelyn said. "She was." They sat together for a moment in the imperfect but functional quiet of two people who have not been easy with each other, finding out they're not quite enemies after all. Then Evelyn stood, straightened her cardigan, and left the room with her spine as straight as it had ever been, and Hannah sat with the library books and the morning light, and a feeling she didn't have a clean word for. It was 3 days later that Hannah brought up the recorder. She'd been thinking about it for a week, turning the problem around in the back of her mind while other things happened in the foreground. The recorder had a battery that wouldn't last forever. The recording on it was original. No copy existed anywhere as far as she knew. Recordings degraded, memory cards failed, tape wore out. She'd known this in an abstract way since the first moment she'd seen it on the shelf, and the knowing had gotten less abstract with every day that passed. She found Damien in the kitchen on a Friday evening, which had become an increasingly common location for their best conversations. There was something about the kitchen that worked differently from his office or the sitting room, less formal, less arranged, a space where people came for functional reasons and stayed for other ones. He was making coffee badly. He made coffee badly on a fairly regular basis, despite having access to both a professional espresso machine and a staff member who could operate it. He seemed to prefer the process of making it himself, even when the results were mediocre, which Hannah had decided was a form of autonomy he'd held on to in a house where everything else was managed by someone else. "Can I talk to you about something?" she said. "You already are," he said, which was the closest he got to teasing. She sat at the island. "The recorder," she said. He didn't stop what he was doing, but something in his shoulders adjusted slightly. "What about it?" "It's the only copy," she said. "Battery, memory card, physical wear. Any of those things go wrong, and the recording is gone." He was quiet. "There are people who do this professionally," she said. "Audio preservation. They digitize recordings, clean them up if needed, create multiple backups in different formats and locations. It's not complicated, and it's permanent." She paused. "The original stays intact. Lily would still have the recorder, the physical thing, the one her mom held, but the voice wouldn't be at risk anymore." Damien set down the coffee things. He turned and looked at her. "I keep a copy," she continued, because she wanted to say all of it while she had the momentum. "Lily keeps a copy. The house has a copy. In 20 years, when Lily's grown and she wants to play it for someone, it's there. No anxiety about the battery dying. No reason to keep it in a room that no one goes into because everyone's afraid of losing it." She watched him work through it. His expression wasn't resistant, more like a man walking a perimeter, checking for the places where something could go wrong. "We've been protecting it by not using it," he said slowly. "You've been protecting it by not using it," she said. "And in the process, Lily spent 8 months not being able to hear her mother's voice." He flinched. It was slight. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't watching. But Hannah was watching. She'd learned to watch. That's not a criticism, she said. I understand why. You are afraid of losing it, and fear makes people do the opposite of what would actually help. She paused. But you don't have to be afraid of losing it anymore. That's the point. He looked at her for a moment. You figured this out with plants, he said. She blinked. What? Lily told me. What you said to her about the basil. About overwatering something. He leaned against the counter. She told me that morning, after the first time we listened to the recording. She said, Hannah says you can care too much and still lose something, so you have to find a different way to care. He looked down briefly. 6 years old, she retained that. Hannah didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. Call the preservation people, Damien said. Whatever it costs, set it up. He picked up his coffee, which was going to be mediocre. And thank you for thinking of it. It's a practical solution, Hannah said. A lot of practical solutions to things in this house weren't thought of until you got here, he said, not looking at her, taking a sip of the coffee with the slight expression of a man who knows what he's getting and has accepted it. The preservation specialist came on a Monday, a quiet man in his 40s named Dennis, who handled the recorder with the specific, careful attention of someone who does this for people in grief regularly and understands what he is actually holding. He worked in the West Wing room, which Evelyn had agreed to open fully for the purpose, and when he was done, he had 3 digital files in 3 separate formats and a cloud backup and a USB drive for Lily, and the original recorder was back on the shelf exactly where it had been, battery replaced and memory preserved. It had taken 4 hours. Hannah watched the tension go out of Damien's frame when Dennis confirmed the files were clean and complete, and she thought, 8 months. 8 months of carrying the weight of that recorder breaking, and it took 4 hours to put it down. She didn't say that. She thought it. Lily listened to the digital version that evening on a small speaker in the living room. Not the West Wing, the actual living room, the room the family used, with her father on one side and Hannah on the other, and Evelyn in the armchair across from them, upright, hands folded, listening to her daughter-in-law's voice read the story about the fox in the river with the grunt for scheming and the slightly breathless rush she did at the exciting parts. When it ended, Lily said, "Can we hear it again?" "Yeah," Damien said. They heard it again. The second time, Lily laughed at the grunt. A full laugh, head back, completely unguarded. The laugh of a child who is not bracing for anything. Damien pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling briefly in the way of someone managing something, and then he looked back down at his daughter laughing, and something in his face went from managed to just present. "Just there," Evelyn said from the armchair. "She used to do that grunt for me too, at Christmas. I always pretended it was undignified, but She stopped. "I always thought it was very funny, actually." Everyone looked at her. She looked at the speaker with the precise expression of someone who has said more than they intended and is deciding whether to retreat or hold the ground. She held it. "She used to do it when Lily was a baby," Evelyn continued, quieter. "Just to make her laugh. She figured out it worked and she weaponized it." A pause. "She weaponized most things she figured out. She was very strategic." And this time the sound Evelyn made was not the controlled compression of someone holding grief back. It was something gentler than that. Something that had, very slightly, opened. Later that night, after Lily was asleep and the house had done its settling, Hannah was in the kitchen with a glass of water when Damien came down. He was in the clothes he wore when he'd given up on working. A t-shirt, loose pants, the jacket gone. No phone in his hand for once. He sat at the island. She was already there, which by now was not unusual. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "Why are you still here?" He said it without accusation. A genuine question, the kind he'd been building toward for a while. "The trial was a week. You stayed. That made sense. Lily was connecting with you. But that's not—" He paused, working out how to say the actual thing. "You had a life before this. You have a sister. You had a job. You've been here almost a month and I've been paying you, but I know that's not—" He stopped again. "Why are you still here?" Hannah looked at her water glass. She thought about the honest answer, which was several things layered in a way that was hard to separate cleanly. "When I was 17, she said, my mother left. Not died. Left. Got in a car with someone and didn't come back. Claire was 13. My dad was around, but he wasn't present. And there was nobody who stayed. Nobody who just decided we were worth staying for. She turned the glass. I'm not making this about me. I know this is Lily's situation, and mine are different things. But I recognize what it looks like when a kid is waiting for the next person to leave. And I decided I wasn't going to be that person. Damien was quiet. He was good, she'd learned, at the particular quality of listening that doesn't reach for a response immediately, that lets what's been said take up its actual space. That's the reason I stayed the first week, she said. I kept staying because it became real. Lily became real. This house became real. Even your terrible coffee became real. She glanced at him. You became real. A pause. Not uncomfortable, but weighted. I became real, he said. You're not the person I expected when I walked up that driveway, she said. I expected someone who hired solutions to his problems and then managed them from a distance. And you do that with most things, but not with her. You're actually trying. She paused. That's not nothing. He looked at her across the island in the low light of the kitchen, the house quiet around them, and Hannah became aware of the precise moment in which a thing that has been approaching for a while arrives at the place where it can no longer be filed away as something else. I owe you more than I can easily calculate, he said. You don't owe me anything, she said. I'm here because I want to be here. That's a distinction that matters to you. It's the only distinction that matters, she said. Owing is a transaction. This isn't. He looked at her for a long moment. His expression was the specific, unguarded kind that she'd seen on his face exactly twice before. Once in the bleachers at the pool, once in the doorway of the West Wing room. The kind that happened when he'd stopped managing what was visible and was just for a moment there. I don't know how to do this, he said. She knew what he meant. Not the house, not Lily, not any of the practical elements that had seemed so insurmountable before she arrived. The other thing, the thing neither of them had named. Neither do I, she said honestly. I've been here a month. You're still in the middle of something. I know, he said, and I'm not. She stopped, reorganized. I need to be honest. I'm not going to step sideways into something without being sure of what it is. Not here, not with Lily, in this house. I wouldn't ask you to, he said. I know you wouldn't. She paused. That's part of the problem. He almost smiled at that, the same almost that she'd been cataloging since the diner, that particular arrested expression that got close and then stopped, as though he'd learned somewhere along the way that completing a smile was a kind of permission he hadn't decided to give yet. I'm not going anywhere, she said quietly. That's not an invitation. It's just the truth. He nodded. Once, she finished her water and stood up and said goodnight and went upstairs to the room that had stopped feeling like a guest room sometime around the second week, and she lay in the too soft bed that her back had, against all expectation, finally made a kind of peace with, and she looked at the ceiling for a while. The house around her was quiet, in the way it sometimes was now. Not the sealed, pressurized quiet of the first days, but something more like rest, like a place that had been holding its breath, remembering that it didn't have to anymore. Outside, the garden was dark. The morning glory was closed for the night, curled and patient, waiting for the light to come back. It always did. That was the thing about those plants. They were stubborn in the right direction. They always turned toward what was coming rather than what had gone. In the room down the hall, Lily slept with Elliot tucked under one arm and the USB drive on the nightstand beside her. The backup of her mother's voice that would not break or wear out or disappear. A small plastic thing containing something permanent. And in the kitchen, the island light was still on, because Damien had stayed sitting there after Hannah left, his hands around a mug of cold, mediocre coffee, looking at the space across the counter where she'd been, with the expression of a man who has finally, after a very long time, allowed himself to want something again, and is not yet sure what to do with that, but is no longer pretending it isn't there. The thing about healing is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive on a specific morning with a particular quality of light, doesn't send ahead any signal that today will be the day the weight shifts. It moves the way the morning glory moved along the east wall. incrementally, stubbornly, in the direction of whatever light it could find, until one day you look up and the wall is covered, and you can't remember exactly when that happened, but you know it didn't happen all at once. That was how October arrived in the Ashcroft house. 6 weeks had passed since the diner. 6 weeks since a little girl had reached out and held 2 fingers on the hem of a stranger's apron, and the stranger had decided that was reason enough to stay. The house was not transformed. It was still 12,000 square feet of stone and careful maintenance and the specific silence of rooms that remembered a different kind of noise. But the silence had changed its character. It was less like absence now and more like space. Room for things, rather than the void left by things that were gone. Lily went back to school on a Tuesday in the first week of October. It had been discussed for weeks. Damien and her teacher exchanging careful emails, a meeting with the school counselor, conversations with Lily herself that Hannah had sat in on at Lily's specific request, her small hand curled around Hannah's on the kitchen table while her father explained what going back would look like. Lily had listened to all of it with her characteristic focused attention, and then said, "Will you be there when I get home?" She was looking at Hannah when she said it. "Every day," Hannah said. Lily had nodded, as though this was the information she'd been waiting for, and the school conversation was effectively resolved. The first morning was not clean or easy. Lily threw up at 7:15, nerves and an empty stomach, and sat on the bathroom floor with her eyes red and Elliot on her lap with the specific misery of a child who has been dreading something and is now inside the dread and finding it exactly as bad as she'd feared. Hannah sat on the floor next to her. Damien stood in the doorway in his suit with his phone in his hand and said, "We don't have to do it today." "We do," Lily said into Elliot's ear. "We really don't." "Dad," Lily looked up at him. "I know you want to fix it, but you can't fix this one. I just have to do it." The room was quiet. Damien looked at his 6-year-old daughter who had just told him something true that he'd needed to hear for 8 months, and he put his phone in his pocket and sat down on the floor too, in his suit, on the bathroom tile. And the 3 of them sat there together for a few minutes without anyone trying to make it better than it was. Then Lily got up, washed her face, picked up her backpack, and said she was ready. Hannah drove her. Damien had offered a driver, the car service, to come himself. Lily had asked for Hannah, just Hannah, which was not a rejection of her father, so much as a child knowing specifically what she needed for a specific task. And Damien had understood this in the way he was gradually getting better at understanding it. They sat in the school drop-off line in Hannah's car, old, slightly uncertain in second gear, not what the other cars in this particular school's drop-off line looked like. And Lily watched the building through the window with the expression of someone assessing terrain. "What if nobody wants to sit with me at lunch?" she asked. "Then you sit by yourself for 1 day," Hannah said. "Which is not fun, but it's survivable. And it usually doesn't happen twice. What if I cry?" "Then you cry. You're allowed to cry at school. Anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong." Lily was quiet for a moment. "What if I miss her?" she said, and she didn't say who she meant, and she didn't need to. Hannah looked at her. "Then you miss her," she said. "That's allowed too. You can miss her at school, at lunch, in the middle of math. You can miss her anywhere. It doesn't have to be a secret." Lily absorbed this. They moved up 2 car lengths. "Elliot has to stay in the bag," Lily said. "The teacher said no stuffed animals during class." "Elliot will be there when you get home." "He'll be worried." "I'll talk to him," Hannah said. "Keep him updated." Lily looked at her with the flat skepticism she applied to statements she had decided were ridiculous but appreciated anyway. "He's stuffed," she said. "That's what he wants you to think," Hannah said. And Lily laughed. Not the enormous laughter of the water glass at dinner, but a small, real laugh, the kind that comes out of the corner of a hard moment and doesn't apologize for being there. She got out of the car and went in without looking back, because she was 6, and she was brave in the specific way that 6-year-olds are brave, which is without any of the self-awareness that makes bravery harder later. Hannah sat in the parking lot for a minute after the drop-off line cleared. She was not going to cry about this. She did not cry about this. She mostly did not cry about this. She drove back to the house. Damien was still there when she got back. He'd rearranged his morning, she realized, though he hadn't mentioned it. He was in the kitchen when she came in, not working, just there, with the coffee that he'd made himself again. He looked at her when she came through the door. "How'd she do?" he asked. "She did it," Hannah said. "That's the whole answer right now." He nodded. He pushed the second mug toward her. He'd made two, which he'd never done before, which meant he'd been expecting her back at this time and had planned accordingly. She sat down and drank the coffee, which was still mediocre, and didn't comment on it. They sat together in the kitchen for 45 minutes, and they talked. Not about Lily, not about the house, but in the aimless direction that conversation goes when two people have stopped performing ease and are actually at ease. He told her about growing up in this house, which had been quieter and colder when he was a child than it was now. His father, a distant figure of significant authority and minimal warmth. His mother building her version of love out of standards and expectations because that was what she'd been given. He'd left for college and not come back except for holidays for 4 years. And when he came back, it was because his father was ill. And by the time his father died, the house had already become his by default. "I never wanted it," he said. "The house, the estate. I wanted the company. That was mine, I built that. But the house was just there. And then Serena came and she loved it immediately. All of it, the stone and the garden, and the drafty east wing in November. She said it just needed more noise." He turned his mug. "She was right." "She usually was," Hannah said. He looked at her. "I've been thinking about what you said. At the pool." He paused. "About her being furious at me." "I shouldn't have said it like..." "No," he said. "You should have. I needed someone to say it like that, directly, without managing me." He looked at the table. "I've been thinking about it as a punishment for 11 months. And somewhere in the last few weeks, it started to feel less like that. More like a fact. It happened. I'm part of the chain of events. And also, I didn't cause a scaffolding collapse. And also, she made her own choice. And also, I miss her. And all of those things are true at the same time." He looked up. "It's strange, holding all of them at once." "That's just what it is," Hannah said. "There's no version of grief that simplifies down to one thing." "I know that now," he said. "I didn't know it before." A pause. "I knew it intellectually. I didn't know it the other way." "The other way takes longer," Hannah said. "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to stop going to the pool on Thursdays." She waited. "Not because I want to stop thinking about her, but because I've been going there as maintenance of the guilt. And I'm trying to stop maintaining that." He looked at her. "I thought about going somewhere different. There's a botanical garden about 20 minutes from here. Serena took Lily there when she was 3. Lily doesn't remember it, but there are photographs." He paused. "I thought it might be a better way to use the time." Hannah looked at this man sitting across from her in the kitchen, where he sometimes forgot to eat and made consistently mediocre coffee and had sat down on a bathroom floor in a good suit because his daughter needed someone on the floor with her, and she thought, there it is. That's the thing I couldn't see from the diner. "That's a good idea," she said. He almost smiled. It completed this time, small and real and slightly uncertain, the smile of a person rebuilding the habit of allowing good things to land. "Yeah? Yeah," she said. Okafor called her 2 days later. She was in the garden with Lily, who had come home from her second day of school, having apparently spent lunch with 2 girls named Priya and Margot, who had strong opinions about horses, and had therefore found a natural conversational partner. Lily was reporting this in the detailed, sequential way she reported things that mattered to her while Hannah listened and Mr. Torres worked at the far end of the bed, pretending not to be listening, though he very clearly was. She stepped away to take the call. "The expungement went through," Okafor said. Without preamble, which was his way when he had good news, he delivered it directly, as though efficiency was a form of respect. It took some doing, but the judge was sympathetic given the circumstances. The record is cleared. Hannah stood in the garden with the phone against her ear and the October sun on her face and didn't say anything for a moment. "Hannah," Okafor said. "I heard you," she said. Yeah, thank you." She paused. "I didn't expect you to actually..." "You were right that it was the correct outcome," he said, clipped and precise, and underneath it, she thought, actually satisfied. "I don't like incorrect outcomes." She laughed, which surprised her. "No," she said, I don't imagine you do. Tell your sister, he said. She should know too. She called Claire right after. Claire cried, which she would deny if asked. Hannah didn't cry, for real this time. She stood in the garden and felt 4 years of a thing she'd been carrying become lighter, in a way that wasn't dramatic, but was very, very real. When she came back to Lily, the little girl looked at her with the attention she gave to faces. Good news? She asked. Yeah, Hannah said. Pretty good news. About what? Something that happened a long time ago, Hannah said. Something that's been following me around. And it's done following me. Lily considered this with great seriousness. Like a shadow? She said. Mr. Torres says some things are like shadows. They only exist because of the light behind you. Hannah looked at Mr. Torres, who had his back to both of them and was definitely not listening. Mr. Torres is smart, she said. He says I'm smart too, Lily said. Not bragging, reporting. He's right about that too, Hannah said. It was Evelyn who brought it up first, which surprised everyone, possibly including Evelyn herself. It was a Sunday evening, the kind that settles slowly into itself, all of them in the sitting room after dinner, Lily cross-legged on the floor with the ocean book, Damien reading something with his glasses on that he still seemed mildly embarrassed by, in the specific way of people who've resisted needing glasses for too long, Evelyn with her wine and her straight spine, Hannah on the sofa with nothing in her hands for once. It was the kind of evening that would have been impossible 40 days ago, this specific arrangement of these specific people in this room without the underlying current of tension that had characterized everything in those first days. Evelyn said without looking up from her glass, "Are you planning to stay, Hannah?" Everyone looked at her. She looked at the middle distance with the composure of someone who had decided to ask the question and was going to maintain her dignity while the question existed in the room. Hannah started. Not as an employee, Evelyn said. I think we've all understood for some time that the arrangement has moved past that categorization. She finally looked at Hannah directly. I mean as family, however that looks. Whatever word suits it. She glanced at Damien briefly, then away. I'm not asking about timelines or arrangements. I'm asking about intention. The room was very quiet. Lily had looked up from the ocean book with her characteristic attention, tracking this conversation with the full focus she deployed for things she understood mattered. Damien was not looking at his mother. He was looking at Hannah with the expression she'd seen in the kitchen, open, there, slightly uncertain in the way of a person who has allowed themselves to want something and is waiting to find out if that was a mistake. Hannah looked at all of them, this imperfect, complicated, still healing collection of people. The grandmother who had been wrong and knew it, the administrator who was slowly becoming something like an ally, the man who made bad coffee and sat on bathroom floors and was learning to complete a smile, and the little girl on the floor who had held onto an apron with 2 fingers and a diner and changed the direction of everything. I'm not going anywhere, Hannah said, and then because she was Hannah Carter, and she said what she meant without much decoration, I'm already home. Lily looked at her for a moment. Then she looked back at the ocean book, turned a page and said, I knew that, in the tone of someone confirming a hypothesis they'd held for a while. Damien made a sound that was unambiguously a laugh, short and real and somewhat reluctant, as though it had caught him off guard, which was still the best kind of laugh he produced. Evelyn's mouth did something that on another face would have been called a smile, and on hers was simply a decided rearrangement of everything stern into something briefly warm. The evening continued. The house held them in it. It was 3 months later when Damien asked her, not with any elaborate arrangement, no dinner reservation, no audience, no gesture calibrated to a romantic context. He asked her in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning while Lily was at school and the house was in its mid-morning quiet. He had 2 cups of coffee made, which had by now become reliable shorthand for I want to talk to you, and he was standing at the counter with both hands around his mug and the specific expression of someone who has made a decision and has decided to follow through before the window closes. She sat down. He said, I know the timing isn't conventional. When has anything about this been conventional? She said. Fair. He looked at his coffee, then at her. I know who you are. I've known for a while. You're the person who shows up. You're the person who tells the truth even when it's uncomfortable. You're the person who sat on my bathroom floor in October at 7 in the morning because my daughter needed someone at floor level. He paused. I'm not where I was 11 months ago. I'm not going to pretend the last year didn't happen or that everything is resolved. Grief doesn't get resolved. I know that now. But I'm not carrying it the same way anymore. And a significant part of why is you. Hannah was quiet. I love you, he said. Direct, without performance, the way Serena had apparently said things, which Hannah suspected was not a coincidence, that Damien had learned something about directness from a woman who'd deployed it fluently and was applying the lesson now. I'm in love with you, and I want to know if you'll marry me, not as a transaction, not as an arrangement, because you're the person I want in this life. Hannah looked at him across the kitchen island where they had sat on 100 mornings with mediocre coffee and good conversation and the accumulated weight of a life being rebuilt from its harder materials. She thought about the diner, the sugar packets, 2 fingers on an apron, the thought that she'd had, somewhere around the second week in the East Wing room, these people are starving and they don't know the food is right here. She thought about Claire saying, you're not there to fix everybody. And she thought, I know, I didn't fix anybody. They did that themselves. I just stayed in the room while they did it. She thought about what it meant to be chosen, genuinely, specifically, without the performance of it, and to choose back. Yes, she said. Obviously, yes. He looked at her. Obviously? I've been home for 3 months, Damien. It was going to be yes. He shook his head slightly, which was as close to flustered as she'd ever seen him. You could have mentioned that. You needed to get there yourself, she said. He reached across the counter and took her hand, and he held it the way people hold things they understand the value of, not tightly, not loosely, just securely, like something he intended to keep. They told Lily after school. She was sitting at the kitchen island eating a snack when they told her, and she went very still for a moment, with the processing expression Hannah had learned to wait out. Then she looked at Hannah. Does this mean you're definitely not leaving? She said. Definitely not leaving, Hannah said. Lily nodded slowly as though logging the confirmation. Then, can I still call you Hannah? Or do I have to call you something else? You can call me Hannah, Hannah said. Always. Okay. Well, Lily ate her snack. Margot's going to be very interested in this. Damien looked at his daughter. You're going to tell Margot. Margot tells me everything, Lily said, with the absolute reasonableness of someone who does not see why this is a complicated question. I tell Margot everything. That's how we work. They married in November in the garden on a day that was cold but clear, the kind of autumn clarity that makes everything look more itself. There was no enormous guest list. Evelyn, Okafor, Mrs. Poole, Mr. Torres, Priya and her parents, Claire, who flew in from Providence and stood next to Hannah and cried from the beginning and continued crying at intervals for the rest of the afternoon. A Judge Okafor knew conducted the ceremony in the garden near the east wall, where the morning glory had gone dormant for the winter, but would be back in spring, stubborn as ever. Lily was the one who had insisted on the flower arrangement. She'd spent 2 serious afternoons with Mr. Torres selecting what should go where, and the result was slightly asymmetrical and very specific to her opinions and completely right. She stood between her father and Hannah during the ceremony, not because anyone had arranged her there, but because she had placed herself there, in the particular way she had of determining where she was needed and going there. She held Elliot under one arm and watched the proceedings with her full attention, and when the judge said the words that made the thing official, she looked up at Hannah with an expression that Hannah had been seeing on her face since the first evening of the horse book. Trust, completely simple, without reservation. Hannah looked back. She held it. The reception was dinner in the house. The dining room opened and actually used for once, people around the table making the noise Serena had once said the house needed. Claire gave a toast that began with the story of Hannah's dead basil and somehow arrived at a genuine and only slightly embarrassing account of who her sister was. A person, she said, who drove 4 hours when you called and stayed as long as you needed and never once made you feel like a burden. Okafor gave a toast that was clipped and precise and unexpectedly moving, 3 sentences about how the measurement of a person's value was not what they came from, but what they chose to do with where they landed. Evelyn did not give a toast. But when Hannah passed her in the hallway after dinner, Evelyn stopped and held both of Hannah's hands in hers for a moment and looked at her directly and said, "Thank you for being the person you are." And that, from Evelyn Ashcroft, was the whole speech. The following spring, on a Saturday that smelled like things beginning again, Damien loaded all of them into the car. Hannah, Lily, Evelyn, who had been somewhat maneuvered into coming and was not about to admit she was glad, and drove to the roadside diner off exit 47. It hadn't changed much. Same yellow sign, same booths probably unchanged since 1987, same television near the ceiling showing something with the sound off. The hostess, not the teenager from before, someone different, pointed them toward a booth near the window, and they filed in. A different waitress came to take their order, but Lily, the moment she sat down, reached for the sugar packet container in the middle of the table. She pulled out a pink packet, 2 white ones, a yellow. She stood them up against each other with focused care, adding each one with the deliberate precision of someone who remembered exactly how this was done. A little house, pink on the inside, white on the corners, yellow on the side because yellow on the outside was better, exactly as it had been. Damien watched his daughter build it. His hand found Hannah's under the table, and she let him hold it. "She remembers," he said quietly. "She always remembered," Hannah said. Lily added the last packet and sat back to examine her work. Then she looked up, not at either of them specifically, but at the table as a whole, at the house she'd built out of nothing, at the people around her, at this unremarkable roadside diner that had apparently been the site of something that changed the course of several lives. "It needs a second floor," she said. "Structurally, it's a challenge," Damien said. Lily looked at him with the specific expression she had for when he said something she'd already anticipated. "I know," she said. "That's why it's interesting." She started on the second floor. Around the table, the noise rose, Claire asking Evelyn about the garden with the specific social grace of someone who has done their homework. Okafor and Mr. Torres having what appeared to be an unexpectedly engaged conversation about orchids, Mrs. Poole examining the laminated menu with the expression of someone who would find it more organized if they were in charge of it. Damien leaned back in the booth and looked at all of it, at this unrepeatable collection of imperfect people who had ended up here through a sequence of events that had begun with a rainy night, and a child who wouldn't eat, and a woman in worn-out shoes who sat down uninvited and built something out of sugar packets. He thought about Serena. He thought about her the way he was learning to, not with the specific weight of guilt that had lived in his chest for over a year, but with something quieter. Gratitude, maybe. The particular gratitude of someone who understands that the love they carried forward didn't diminish what came before, that a heart can hold more than one true thing at a time, that the people we lose leave us changed in ways we spend years discovering. She would have liked Hannah. He was sure of it, not because they were similar, they weren't, not exactly, but because Serena had always been able to see people clearly, and Hannah Carter was someone who showed you exactly who she was, and Serena had no patience for anything else. He thought she would have laughed at the coffee situation. He was still thinking about this when Lily, without looking up from the second floor of the sugar packet house, said, "Dad?" "Yeah," he said. "You went somewhere." He looked at her. "I was thinking about your mom," he said. He'd learned to say it that way, directly, without managing it. How she would have liked today. Lily considered this, fitting a yellow packet carefully into the corner of the second story. "She would have made me eat the whole pancake," she said. "She absolutely would have. She would have ordered the pie too. She always got the pie." "She had strong feelings about diner pie," Damien confirmed. Lily nodded seriously. Then she looked at him with her mother's eyes and said, "I think she'd be glad that we're okay now." She paused. "Are we okay?" He looked at his daughter, at Hannah beside him, at this table full of people who had been, each in their own way, found by something they hadn't known they were looking for. "Yeah, kid," he said. "We're okay." Lily looked back at the sugar packet house, which was holding its second floor with improbable determination. "Good," she said. And she meant it the way children mean things when they're not performing anything, completely, without qualification, all the way down. Outside, the spring was doing what spring does, which is arrive without apology and start covering things in new growth, whether anyone was ready or not. The morning glory on the east wall of the Ashcroft estate was probably already starting, A few tentative tendrils finding the gap between stones, deciding the direction, beginning again. Some things are like that. They don't wait to be invited. They find the light, and they turn toward it, and they hold on. And given enough time, given enough stubbornness, they fill the whole wall. That's not a neat lesson. Life doesn't package itself neatly, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But if there's anything the last year had taught any of them, Damien learning to set down guilt, Evelyn learning to question what she'd always assumed, Okafor learning that protecting people and protecting secrets were not the same job, Lily learning that missing someone and being happy were not forces working against each other. It was this. The bravest thing you can do most of the time is stay. Stay in the room when it's uncomfortable. Stay at the table when the silence is heavy. Stay through the part where you don't know if it's going to work, where you can't yet see what you're building, where the second floor seems structurally impossible and everyone with sense has walked away. Hannah Carter had known this since she was 17 years old, sitting in an apartment with her 13-year-old sister, the sound of a car pulling away from the curb, deciding without anyone to tell her to decide it that leaving was not something she was prepared to do. She'd been practicing it her whole life. She just hadn't known until a rainy night off exit 47, where it was going to matter most. The pancakes arrived. Lily's had blueberries, same as always. She looked at them with the complete satisfaction of someone who has ordered exactly the right thing and known it in advance. She picked up her fork. She ate the whole pancake.